God-sized story.
Hello and welcome to another episode of God-Sized Stories. I'm very blessed. I have LJ back with me again. LJ, tell everybody about yourself.
My name is LJ Lowery. I am currently president of the organization Geeks Under Grace, which we have a website for and all that stuff. I talked more about that last episode I was on. I basically minister to geeks and Christian geeks alike, and kind of help bridge between those two. And I work at my church as a day job, and ultimately my hobbies are anything geeky, gaming related, movies, especially comics, a bunch of that stuff, various fandoms. But that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Yeah, like as you said, you were on a few months ago to talk a little bit more about Geeks Under Grace. And audience, if you haven't listened to it, especially if you know me, you probably like a lot of the same things as me, and you would really enjoy Geeks Under Grace. I go to a mix of the website and the community page on Facebook all the time. It's just such a comforting place to find things that are both geeky and God related at the same time. But we're not going to talk really much about that today. Instead, when we talked last time, you shared with me very, very briefly, only a small nugget of the fact of your testimony, and from what I gather, it's really powerful, and that's I really want to capture that, because the Lord works miracles through us, and He is so glorified then when we share that with other people. And I would love to hear your story and share it with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, I like to share my testimony because, for me, I'm not someone who's like super theologically educated. So it's like I'm not going to try to debate somebody or on like the biblical principles on like why I think they should follow Jesus. And for me, it's basically here's what He's done for me. Here's the path I walked, and maybe He can do something for you as well. So I hope just through my story that people can get something out of it, maybe go searching from there.
Amen. So where do you want to start with all of this?
So I want to start about 10 years ago, but it's not going to take that long to tell this story. About 10 years ago, I was living in California, Southern California, and I'm living in Louisiana now. And so what happened was I was getting involved with drugs and alcohol, and I was getting involved in some gang affiliation as well. I was just down a dark path that I just knew was wrong. My conscience was there the whole time with me. There was times I look back that I feel like were totally God, that God was just didn't let happen for me. Times when I should have been pulled over by the police or, get, like stuff like that. And so basically I knew these things were wrong. And so I had been in talks with my aunt and uncle, who are already living in Louisiana. They had already gone to church. They were in recovery. I think they'd been in recovery for about a year through a program called Celebrate Recovery, which is awesome. I love it. That's
a great ministry.
Yes. And so I'd been in talks with them, and then I was living in a very powder keg situation. Multiple people living in the house at my grandmother's, and my cousin and my brother and stuff, and my parents, and there's just so much. And so eventually something happened to where I got in this fight with my cousin and stuff like that, and we went to blows and stuff like that. And so eventually I was just like, okay, I need to get out of here. Like it's all I can do is call up my aunt. And so I called her the next morning, and she's like, they were always telling me like, hey, just whenever you're ready, tell us, And so I basically called them up and said, hey, I'm ready now. And the next day, I was on a plane with a backpack full of what clothes I had, what items I had, and that's kind of how I got to Louisiana.
Wow.
And the cool part is that this is how God works is that I was saved that weekend. That weekend was I was whenever I first was sober. So the story about me being baptized is I'd never really been to a church that was like non-traditional. The church I went to when I was very younger was very traditional, and so it was just a really cool place. And so when that morning when my aunt was doing announcements for the Landing, which is the youth version of sober recovery, it was when they were worshiping in the student venue of all places, in the high school venue, I just like felt it. I felt the spirit, and I truly feel like that was it. And so it was this big baptism Sunday where they were preaching about baptism in all venues. And so across the first service, when she went to do these announcements, I was hearing the word that these pastors were bringing on why I should get baptized, and how cool it is for me to do that, and the things that God would lift me from. And it had been what I was looking for all along. Before I even became a full believer, there were nights where I would pray and just cry out to God, like, give me a sign, give me something, like a way out, and that was it. And so that very Sunday I was baptized. The second service was cool because we're in the main venue this time, and the pastor was talking and preaching and just saying all these things that just connected the dots for me. And so I told my uncle, I said, hey, like, I want to go do this. And so he's like, what, really? I said, yeah. And so he basically said, like, if anybody wants to come up, go walk through that door, and we're going to get you all hooked up and, set up to be baptized. And so, I was the first one that went up, and then so the pastor said something like, anybody gonna follow him, whatever. And so I just looked back, and there was maybe 6 or 7 other people. And so I was just like, wow, the image, like I have the image in my head now, and just how powerful that was. And to think me stepping up, led others to step up that day as well. And it's just ever since then, I've been sober and been a faithful believer. So the interesting part where things changed and my faith was truly tested was 4 months later. I got this phone call. Oh, well, I didn't get the phone call, but my aunt and uncle were. I was just hanging out one night 4 months later, and it was just a normal night, and so. I was watching. I actually went. So this is how crazy this is. I went out to the living room, and my uncle was watching something. So I was just hanging out. I didn't take my phone with me. My aunt comes out and she's like, "Hey, do you have your phone? Like, have you got any phone calls yet?" And I said, "No, my phone's in my room. I'm out here watching a movie." And so she goes and she takes my uncle into the room, kind of tells him what's going on. And so then my uncle says, "Hey, like he's like, let's go out to the truck. Like I'm gonna, and talk and so I can pray with you, whatever." And I'm like, "What's this all about?" Like I knew it was something bad.
Yeah, at that point,
Yeah, and I'm like, and I was just the thoughts were running through my head, and so he prayed over me, and then told me that they had found notes that my dad and my stepmom were going to commit suicide back home. My sister had walked into the room to visit, I guess in the upstairs room, and they had these notes, talking about all these things, and said that mine was going to be mailed out to me or whatever, this letter. And so, basically, my grandmother and some people, they called the police to try to track them down, see what, track their phone numbers and all this stuff, and. Apparently, they had tracked them, I guess, through a taxi company or something. They tracked their path to the beach, right there, not far from in Ventura. And so so I'm trying to think. So then my brother calls me about I think it was 3 in the morning their time, and it was 5 my time. I slept a little bit that night, and even the pastor had come over earlier that evening, and I was just searching through scripture and my Bible app, trying to find out what God says and what the Bible says about suicide. And I think what helped me sleep is that, there's this belief that, the fact that, when somebody commits suicide, that they're going straight to hell. And I don't believe that. I looked it up. The Bible never says anything to that. And so the bodies were found, and my dad and my stepmom, they had shot themselves with his 357. And so now I look back at this now, and my dad, he had multiple sclerosis, and it was greatly affecting him. My stepmom was dealing with some past issues and some depression issues. So it's like I knew why. But I also had this weird peace in my heart whenever I left about saying that, like, this is probably the last time I'm ever going to see my dad again when I left, because I think that was part of why I was kind of afraid to leave at first. And so ultimately that's what happened. But that didn't really, it did affect me, but what helped me out was the love and support that I received from my church. A couple guys I knew from Celebrate Recovery showed up at my door that morning. Our flight, my aunt and I went, and I helped run a service a week later, but basically they paid for my suit, they paid for our flights, and it was just this overwhelming love that I only knew could come from God. And ultimately I did go through a brief period of grief where I didn't know how to handle things, and I sunk myself into the gaming, which was my crutch, which eventually became ministry and my hobby. And so which is really cool. There was a lot I had to do to get through that, though. I took a class with a program called Grief Share, which is also a program like Celebrate Recovery.
Another one I love.
Yes, and it was very hands-on. I had this workbook and everything, these videos that just explained these emotions that I was going through. And I worked through these programs, and I followed through with them. And eventually, around the same time, I also got a job at my church, which was cool because I had helped them do some stuff while my uncle, who runs a painting company, was doing stuff there. So I would stay busy helping them at the church do some small things. And eventually they asked my uncle, if, like, hey, would LJ want to come work here? And so I took the job, and I've been working there ever since, almost 10 years. I think it's going to be like 9 pretty soon. Yeah. And so ultimately, like, just there's so much positivity that came through the darkness, and that's what God is he's a shining light in the darkness. And ultimately, once I kind of healed from that, I also used my testimony. I got into spoken word for a little while. I found out there was this local group, which was really cool. I had this spoken word poem about my testimony, basically the things I'm telling you now, but within a few lines, and which was really cool. I ended up going with a group to Houston to do a regional poetry slam, which was really fun. We did all right, but it was it was really cool. Like again, it was sharing my story, getting that out there. And from there, so that was about, so when everything happened was about 2012, actually, was when, right after Christmas, so almost a year from now, on January 3rd. I mean, not a year, but almost like it was. Yeah, so it'll be about 8 or 9 years since then as well. So all this happened kind of all at once. But so that was in 2012. I got into the poetry scene about 2013 or 14. So it really took me a few good years to kind of finally grow up and heal from those things that were keeping me from growing. And so after the poetry thing, I had family follow me down here. I live with my mom and my stepdad now, which most of my family is here now. So basically, I don't really have much of a reason to go back to California. This has become my new home.
There you go.
Yeah, and so with that transition also came. That's when kind of Geeks Under Grace came in because I was still doing some poetry stuff at the time, and I was recording some amateur hip hop music, which is kind of laughable when I hear it now, when I go back and listen to it. But it was one of those things. I'm like, I asked God. I said, God, what do you want me to do? Because I had the opportunity to apply to be a game reviewer for Geeks Under Grace at the time. And so I asked God, I said, God, do you want me to pursue this music thing, this poetry thing, or do you want me to go and do this, to write about my passion and my hobbies and use that? And so, so basically he gave me the answer, and he said, go write for Geeks Under Grace. And really, that's a lot of the story from there, because now, earlier this year, I had just when I spoke with you, I had just become president of the organization, and I've learned a lot from there. I've gotten to interact with a lot of people. I've learned so much about this craft as well. I've interacted with developers, publishers, PR agencies, and I've built relationships, through with other believers, such as yourself. Like, I have 2 other podcasts I'm going to be on later this weekend. So it's just so awesome, this whole world that I'm in now, and it's a world that another thing that I really struggled with a lot was through that building my faith and building my relationship with God. A thing that I was told was that being into the things that I am into is not grown up. It's not healthy, and it's not the adult thing to do. And so which is it's like, hey, well, I'm I look what I'm doing now. And at first that was my reason for joining Geeks Under Grace, was to almost to be like, hey, like, look, this thing you're saying is wrong. But then it became much more than that. It was almost out of spite for the family members and friends that would tell me, like, hey, like, this isn't, this isn't, you can't really be into these things and go walking around talking to people about these things. And but it became more than that, and it became more than trying to prove people wrong. And so I'm sorry, hold on, I gotta mute real quick. Okay. Sorry, my household's a little loud, so I don't know if you were able to hear all that in the background.
Just muffled.
Okay, good.
But yeah, it's very encouraging. Like, it just, like, it makes me think of, like, Paul, where it's like, be in the world, not of it. And it's like, as we talked about in our Geeks Under Grace episodes, like, you have this huge group of people of all ages too, that you have this opportunity to connect to. The Lord is just ripe in that area. Why not? Yeah, it's definitely a demographic and an outlet that really needs to know God. There's so many of these gaming communities that are just so toxic, and it's really cool to be like, when somebody's like, Geeks Under Grace, are y'all like, Christians or whatever, like, and all that. And so it's just really cool to be like, yeah, like, hey, we're just like you. So exactly.
Man. I mean, that's just kind of where my path has led me is here, and I've been doing this for the last couple of years, and it's one of those things where it's like, I'm still young enough to where hopefully, one of these days I can go work for a legit gaming outlet and work in the journalism industry. Earlier this year, I haven't really publicly talked about it just because I wasn't sure about it, but I actually did apply for a job at Game Informer. I never heard anything about it, but it felt really good to know that, doing what I love for this ministry has equipped me to hopefully be able to go out into the world one day, and just, carry that with me, and be able to point back to Geeks Under Grace and be like, hey, this is where I learned it all, and
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, LJ, thank you so much. And as I always say, for so many reasons, I just want to highlight like a trend that I noticed throughout that I want to thank you for is your willingness to be used.
Mm-hmm.
Like at every single stage of your walk too. Like you said, even before you were willing to go before God and pray to him, even before you were fully a Christian, as you were saying, is like that's a huge thing that people aren't always willing to do. And then like the next step, that baptism thing, I love like that makes me so excited when you said that, because that is the epitome of the statement of God can use anyone at any time. Like you don't need to be a great theologian to move people. Like you literally, like by you just moving somewhere, literally moved people, not just literally like heart wise, and literally moved them as well. So thank you for that. And then as you continued, like now, like with the ministry, like you just want to be used by God however he wants to use you. And it's so encouraging to see you just do it. Like you're just giving it to him. Be like, Lord, just use me now. Use me how you want. We as humans sometimes, I definitely struggle with this. It's like, no, I want to be used how I want to be used.
Yeah.
So it's encouraging to just see you be so willing to be used. And thank you for just all the ministry work that you've done and are doing. And I see that trend continuing in the future, as you said, like you're talking about your future, and it's still that same idea in there. Like you want to go out to be in the world to be used by God, not just, for the fun of it, but because you can make a kingdom impact. And I love it. And I'm excited to see how God uses you in the future for that.
Yeah,
so,
me too.
LJ, thank you for all of that. Thank you, listeners, as well. I've had so many opportunities now with LJ. As I said before, go back and listen to the other episode. It is so fun, and it is such a great way. Same with the couple bonus episodes I've done with LJ. If you haven't had a chance to listen or especially watch the last one, please do. And audience, as always, I couldn't do this without you. Goodbye.